Welcome to the deep dive of Key to My Research, the science podcast by the Excellence Strategy at the University of Tübingen. My name is Jennifer and I'm your host. In this episode, we will get to know Professor Christoph Bareither. Since 2021, Christoph has been a professor for cultural and digital anthropology at the University of Tübingen. His research focuses on the ethnographic study of everyday digital cultures and specifically on the impact that artificial intelligence has on our everyday lives. Welcome, Christoph. We're very glad to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
So artificial intelligence is slowly but surely getting into every part of our daily lives, whether we're writing or generating texts with ChatGPT, whether we're navigating with Google Maps, AI is everywhere. And we'll get into this matter later and talk about it. But first, we'd just like to know, what is cultural anthropology?
So cultural anthropology is a discipline that has different kinds of strands in Germany. My strand is called empirische Kulturwissenschaft. So literally it would be empirical cultural studies, but internationally it's part of cultural anthropology. And cultural anthropology studies, it's already in the name, human culture. And the big question is, what do we mean by culture, right? So what do you think of if you think about culture? What's the first thing that comes to mind?
Yeah, sure. Basically, I would be thinking of cultures of a certain country, but this is not what we're talking about. So I'm very interested in what you have to say about culture.
It could be, I guess. The most important thing is when we talk about culture, we do not mean like high culture in the sense of the high arts and literature and so on. It could be, but what we mean by culture is mostly everyday culture. Raymond Williams, a scholar from cultural studies, once defined it as culture is a whole way of life. Right? So culture is basically everything we do the whole day, the routines in which we engage. Culture is also in the relationships between people, how they connect to each other, but also how they connect to their world, the things of their everyday life and, to their environment and so on. And also technologies, I can talk about that later. And culture is also, of course, in the structures we build that govern ourselves and that enforce power over our lives. And as culture anthropologists, we study these dimensions. So we study everyday culture and we try to study it from within culture. So we really go into the everyday lives of people and then we try to figure out, what makes them tick, what makes their lives meaningful to them. And then we try to create thick descriptions of their everyday lives.
Mm-hmm. So you're already talking about methods. I'll just stay with this topic because it's quite interesting. So what are the ethnographic methods you use in your field of research?
Yeah. So as I just said, the idea is really to dive into the everyday lives of people. And one method we use quite frequently is participant observation. So we actually go along with people, we take part in their everyday lives, we share their everyday lives, and we try really to research with them, not only about them, So we really can try and represent their view of their world as good as this is possible. And also, of course, we do interviews, often very long qualitative interviews. And we have a whole range of other methods like source analysis. In my case, we do a lot of social media analysis and so on. And we basically try to use any resource that we can get our hands on in order to best provide these thick descriptions of people's everyday lives. And in my case, specifically, I do a lot of digital ethnography, which basically means we do the same things with digital tools. So we do participant observation online, for example. We do interviews online or via chat. And we also do a lot of experimental and interdisciplinary methods working with computer science or information science in order to illuminate different aspects of people's everyday lives through digital technologies.
Mm-hmm. So we talked a bit about the terms, about cultural anthropology. Could you tell us about the second field of your research, which is digital anthropology?
Sure. So digital anthropology is basically a part of cultural anthropology, but it's also an interdisciplinary field where different perspectives come in. So, for example, media studies is one of these disciplines that kind of intersect with digital anthropology. Computer science is as well quite important, but also other disciplines or fields like science and technology studies and so on. So digital anthropology is also studying everyday culture, but it focuses on human-technology relationships. And it tries to figure out how well, on the one hand, how people use digital technologies in their everyday lives, but also how these technologies shape their everyday lives in return, right? So it's not just a one-way street. It's not just about the one or the other, but really the relations that emerge in between people and technologies and how these shape their everyday lives. And this is basically the main task and field of digital anthropology.
Mm-hmm. And how do you cope with both fields being dynamic? I mean, technology is ever evolving and humans also. So how do you do research in this very dynamic field?
Yeah, it's challenging, especially when it comes to AI, because things are developing so fast. It's incredible. And obviously, the way people use digital technologies also develops and changes all the time. We believe that still by spending a lot of time with people, and our research projects are usually going on for a couple of years. And we still think that it can provide meaningful insights into what's going on the ground in everyday lives when it comes to digital technologies, and that these insights can inspire also societal dialogue, and maybe even political decisions related to digital technologies. Because the kind of knowledge we create, it's not like a quantitative science where you have a big survey and it's really fast and then you have numbers, how many people use which technologies or questions like that. It's really much more selective, maybe even subjective, but I would argue much deeper insights into how it actually impacts a person, their lives, the way they think, the way they behave, and so on, and really get a better sense of how it is to live with digital technologies and how to struggle with new opportunities that come up through digital technologies and so on. And so these are the questions we are trying to address. It's not better or worse than a quantitative kind of science, but it's a different epistemic approach that we think is quite valuable as a contribution to societal debates about digital technologies.
Mm-hmm. So what does your research aim at finding out, if you had to put it in a nutshell?
Well, it's basically what I already said. So my research in a nutshell is trying to find out how people use digital technologies to shape and live their everyday lives, but also how these technologies come in with their own affordances and their own agency to shape these everyday lives in return. And we are trying to look at both things at once to create basic knowledge which we can use to better understand our digital societies.
And just talking about your career path, what led you to the University of Tübingen and to the research on artificial intelligence?
Yeah, so I was at Humboldt University in Berlin before as a junior professor of media anthropology, which is more or less the same than digital anthropology. It's a different kind of label. And, and the professorship here opened up with a focus on digital anthropology, and I applied. But it's actually not what led me to Tübingen. I was at Tübingen before, so I actually studied here also and did my PhD here, although I didn't live here at that time. And then I was away for quite a couple of years and came back. And since I really loved the place and also my institute, I was very happy that I had the opportunity to come back as a professor.
And being in Tübingen and having the Cyber Valley, how does that benefit you as a scientist here?
Yeah, I mean, for a small town like Tübingen, the small town with its medieval charm, there's really a lot going on in terms of AI development, in terms of the whole startup scene and so on. And for me, this created an opportunity for a completely new research field. I was interested in AI when I came here, but I hadn't had any projects connected to AI at that point, 3 years ago. And so the opportunities in Tübingen are quite interesting in that respect because you have a lot of potential cooperation partners that you can work with. And especially now, with what's going on in the Cyber Valley and so on, and the machine learning cluster, of which I'm a member, there are quite a few opportunities of, planning future research projects in this area of cultures of artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm. So let's take a closer look at some examples of your research. AI has a capability of changing how we perceive the past and also transforming our entire culture of commemoration and memory. Could you tell us about the project you're currently working on that has to do with this topic?
Sure. So one of the projects I'm currently part of, it's called From the Era of Witness to Digital Remembrance. And we are working there. So researchers in Tübingen work together with researchers from the Ben Gurion University in Israel. And we are trying to figure out how different digital technologies transform cultures of Holocaust remembrance or Holocaust commemoration. And my project specifically, which I'm conducting with our researcher Berit Zimmerling, who's doing the ethnographic research, is on AI-based virtual survivor testimonies. So I should probably quickly explain how these work. So they have been produced by the USC Shoah Foundation, which is a big foundation in the context of Holocaust remembrance, already since 2015. And they already, back in these days, did lots and lots of survivor interviews and recorded them on video. And then they had the idea, basically, of creating a system that would allow you to talk to these testimonies. And what they did is they invited quite a large number of survivors and did multi-day interviews with them and recorded their answers on video, actually as a stereoscopic video that would allow in the future to create holograms, but they're not using that at the moment. So basically, it's a video of them, and have asked most of the survivors around sometimes more than 1,000 questions. So it's a lot of material, a lot of answers from Holocaust survivors. It's basically like very, very, very long video interviews. And then what they did is they used these videos then as sources to feed an AI-based system that allows users to ask open questions. So it's a natural language processing system. And then the system, which is trained by the researchers the programmers and the technicians also, and then the system finds the best potential answer to that question. And the goal of the whole thing is to allow for an emotionally involving dialogue with Holocaust survivors, who are already deceased, right? So, and as you can imagine, it's quite an interesting project, has sparked quite the heated debate in cultures of Holocaust remembrance. And of course, it's a very two-edged sword, because on the one hand, so our researcher, she's also doing ethnographic research with the USC Shoah Foundation and other institutes who are producing and creating and displaying these testimonies. They are specifically displayed in Holocaust museums and Holocaust exhibitions. And she also studies groups, especially students and school students, who interact with these testimonies. And to a certain extent, it works, it appears, right? So people talk to virtual survivors. Especially young people apparently try and make this a successful emotional experience. They want this kind of emotional immersion, and it actually can communicate a sense of connection to a certain extent. But then on the other hand, what happens in the background, right? So you have to assign a certain kind of agency to an AI system, which determines, it's trained by humans, but it determines what is the best answer to that question out of this pool. So an AI system is assigned quite an active role in dialogues about Holocaust remembrance, right? And at the same time, even to make this whole dialogue functional for an AI system, of course, you have to reduce complexity. So it's not the same thing, right? You have to freeze this dialogue in time and to make it work. And then you have to, make it functionable for the algorithms that use these sources for the interaction. And these are things that we have to also ask critically about what happens here with cultures of Holocaust remembrance, right? So it's not a black and white story. It's quite an interesting project, and there's many reasons to do that and why it makes sense. But there are also a lot of reasons to look closely at what happens, actually. And this is what we're trying to do, with our kind of ethnographic research, to dive into this whole field directly and to describe what happens, to create analytical arguments that help us better understand what happens there, and then to provide this knowledge foundation that helps us maybe in the future to better evaluate how we want to deal with these kind of projects and also to better understand their broader impact on cultures of remembrance.
Mm-hmm. So you've obviously been talking to the virtual survivors. How has this experience been for you on an emotional level?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I think it works better as a group. So for me as a researcher, it's hard to let go of the whole knowledge of the system behind it and so on. But then again, you always have, every once in a while, you actually have the sense of immersion. It's weird. You know that it's, a system, but you also know it's an actual answer by the Holocaust survivor. And it creates these moments where it actually works, that you have the sense of immersion into a dialogue. But then it also has these moments where it throws you out, like very abruptly, And this is also why in the exhibitions, if you experience these testimonies there's always a kind of moderator that tries to smooth the experience and, guide people in asking the right questions so this kind of emotional experience can emerge without disruptions and so on.
And where are the limits of these virtual testimonies? Can you ask any question?
Well, you can ask any question. The question is, what answer will you get, right? So you will only get the answers that were predicted to be meaningful at that time, right? And we have examples that already show that even after a couple of years after these testimonies have been produced, people might have different questions or also different responses to the answers that the survivors give and so on. And so I think the biggest limit is, on the one hand, there's only a certain set of answers that are available. The other limit is that these have been made during a specific time. And the question is, can you freeze the way we talk to virtual survivors in time? And is that meaningful in the future, right? Isn't memory culture something that's maybe supposed to change? And what are we doing if we use AI to, stop this moment in time and then say we will use these dialogues over and over again, maybe for, 100 years or so? And where does it leave us? So, and, it's like one of these tiny moments where you think, oh, yeah, okay, it's an AI system, but actually it's videos and so on. But if you actually think about it, it's quite significant what happens there. And, these are the kind of little moments that tell us a lot about AI and cultures of AI that we are trying to study in our projects.
And you were talking about the critical voices and the heated debate about this form of commemoration. Could you tell us a little bit more about these voices and how you view these voices?
Yeah, I guess we are kind of in a position in the middle. So I guess on the one hand, if we are drawing really contrasts here. So on the one hand, there is the voices that enthusiastically celebrate it as a new way of engaging young people in Holocaust remembrance, of actually, there's like this, basically a narrative of how Holocaust commemoration, and especially the role of the survivor, the role of the witness, can be saved or safeguarded for the future through these projects. So it's like this rescue narrative. On the other hand, there is extremely critical voices that basically highlight the very negative impact and the reduction that's basically or the way that Holocaust survivors and their stories are reduced to something that can be algorithmically calculated and so on and so on. Also, there's a criticism of Disneyification, that it's basically making dialogue with the Holocaust survivor into entertainment industry and so on. So these are the two poles, basically, of a heated debate. And our own position is, as ethnographers, we never try to judge, right? We just try to look what happens and why is this meaningful for the people producing them? How do students actually experience it when they talk to it? And we see both sides, right? And we try to basically provide an independent perspective that acknowledges the complexities and also the ambivalences in a project like this.
Just quickly, talking geopolitics, how is it currently with the collaboration with Israel? Are you capable of working together?
Yeah, we are, mostly online, of course, but our colleagues will also visit us in October. The situation is extremely difficult, as you can imagine. We had basically more or less a break in the project. It didn't affect so much this particular project because this is the researcher in Germany doing the project, and her fieldwork was in the United States. So that was not directly impacted, but the project more generally, of course, is impacted a lot by the situation.
So this is one of your main fields of research and interest at the moment, but we have several more we'd like to talk about. And one of them being curating the feed and interdisciplinary perspectives on digital image feeds and their curatorial assemblages.
Complicated title.
Yeah, very complicated title. And I'd have to repeat that, I think. No? Okay. Okay, so one of your topics is curating the feed. And what are you doing in this project?
Well, I'll start from the beginning, right? There's social media, obviously, and they have a massive impact and play a massive role in the everyday lives of many people, especially young people. I just checked the numbers before I came, and actually it's in Germany, the teenagers and adolescents, around 60% of them use Instagram or TikTok. This is the two platforms we study several times a week, actually. So that's like a lot, right? So you can imagine the influence that these platforms have is quite significant. We also have interview partners and so on. They report basically the first thing a lot of young people do is, go on social media in the morning when you're still in bed, and then you scroll yourselves into sleep at night and so on. So there's something about these platforms that we need to look into a lot closer than we had before. And this is what we're trying to do with this project. Do you use social media?
Of course, yes. I was just thinking of myself scrolling through the feed in the morning or in the evening, which I have now limited to a certain amount of minutes, and then Instagram switches off.
All right. Are you also using TikTok?
No.
No. All right. Yeah, but it's actually, TikTok numbers are growing. So with young people and teenagers, it's almost reaching the levels of Instagram. And so clearly these platforms have a lot of power in shaping how young people experience the world and experience relationships to others and so on. And what they see is structured by recommender algorithms. And recommender algorithms today are mostly based on AI systems, right? And these are black boxes, so we don't exactly know how they work. The companies try to be more transparent about it, but you only get like bits and pieces of information about how they work. And we know they have quite a big impact. But it's complicated. You cannot just say that AI algorithms control exactly what users see, because they are designed in a way that they use the data provided by users, right, to curate their experience together with them. So you have a certain kind of influence as a user, but the algorithm and the AI-based system also has a certain kind of influence. And in this project, we're trying to look at how algorithms and AI systems and users come together to curate their social media feeds, right?
So are you on Instagram?
Yeah, I am on Instagram.
And what does your feed look like?
Yeah, my own feed is, I'm not so frequently on Instagram, I guess. It's dogs, for example, is a lot there. So I'm a dog person, and Instagram, in quotation marks, knows about this. Of course, it has figured out really quickly that I have a 4-year-old son, and now I get all the advertisement.
Parental advice?
Yeah. And I actually bought something. So I knew, since I know about algorithms, I thought this is a very big mistake, right? But I still did it, and now I get all the advertisements and so on. But on the other hand, I cooperate with the algorithm. At one point, I figure out, well, I give it a little, then it gives me a little back and so on. And so people figure out how to deal with algorithms in their everyday lives, and this is a way of interacting with AI. Even if people don't know if it is AI and what it exactly does, they have this, what we call in anthropology, practical sense for how to deal with it so it works for them, right? And at the same time, obviously, the algorithm uses these forms of collaboration and interaction to create economic revenue through these advertisements, right? So what we look at in this project specifically, a specific interest that came in the project through our researcher, Anne-Marie Wohlfahrt, so she's doing the ethnographic part again of that project, is an interest in normative beauty standards. So how bodies are stereotypically represented in a lot of social media posts. And then the question, what role algorithms and recommender algorithms play in reproducing these bodily stereotypes, these typical norms of beauty. There's also a big debate right now on AI filters, face filters, and so on. That's also part of it, but I'll concentrate on the algorithm part. And so what we are trying to study is how people perceive bodily beauty through these social media feeds, and how this shapes how they experience bodies of other people on Instagram and offline, and also their own bodies. how does that shape the way they perceive bodily beauty and bodily beauty standards? And we are doing this at the moment by collaborating with a group of young students who are paid, so they're student assistants. And in this case, the method is media diaries. That's pretty interesting because we have basically young people who use social media so and so many hours a week, and then they create field notes and diaries that we then use for our analysis, combined with interviews with them, to better understand how it is for them to live on everyday lives with these platforms and with their algorithms that present a certain kind of body image to them on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm. This sounds like a very manual method
yes,
of doing
is.
research. Can you use AI here?
Well, I don't think so, because I think AI is just, especially, I'm not sure which AI you're talking about, but maybe generative AI, we can talk about that later. It can produce, of course, stereotypes of what the experience of an user might look like. But we are really interested in the actual thing because we want to have lively experiences and lively examples that are actually true, that give us some insight into the experiences of social media users. But we also do use AI, yes. For that first part, no. But for another part, we do. We have a cooperation in this project with colleagues from the Bauhaus University in Weimar, media studies and computer science. And what we did there was, so our people, our student assistants and our researcher created a data set. And the data set includes examples of social media posts that reproduce in their subjective experience, that reproduce bodily beauty standards and stereotypes, and examples who don't do this. And what we did then, or what our colleagues in Weimar did then, is to train an AI-based classifier that is now capable of, it's almost finished and actually works, with quite a high number of success, to identify how many images or posts in a social media feeds create these bodily stereotypes and beauty stereotypes and so on. And for what will we use this? We will use this for trying to determine if, for example, a new feed that has not been used is already dominated by these type of pictures. And then we want to try and find out, we haven't done this yet, if it's, for example, a lot easier to train your algorithm in a way that it recreates these stereotypes, and, as we think it is, much more difficult to train it to be more diverse in terms of body images and so on. And the second thing we want to do or try to do is actually create a tool, kind of an interventionist tool, that could be used by social media users to, put in your username and so on. And so it can tell you how dominant these kind of images are in your own feed. So you are more or less empowered, or, it's visualized for you how dominant these images are. And then you might be able, or, more inspired to actually do something against it if you want to. I mean, some people might not mind, if these stereotypes are reproduced in their feed on a day-to-day basis. But others actually maybe would like to know more about this and actually take measures to avoid this kind of behavior of their algorithms. And it's kind of a best idea to create best practices if we can intervene into how algorithms co-curate our lives through critical reflection.
Mm-hmm. And have you come across any findings or outcomes that are relevant for the instant?
You mean, no, we haven't used, with the classifier, we haven't used it yet because we are at the moment building it and we want to be finished, I think, in a month or so. And then we will try if it works and what insights it will offer us. But we haven't done that yet.
And talking about body images and the ideal of beauty, what pictures are we talking about? Are we talking about female bodies, male bodies, and on what channels?
Yeah, so the selection of channels was quite explorative, but it followed an ethnographic inductive process that basically builds up a selection of social media posts alongside categories then created by the researchers in the process. So that's an inductive process, not so much deductive. What they have in there in the data set is, bodies of humans, and both male and both female. And an interesting part of the project was a lot of controversial discussion among this research group on the examples which are not clearly the one or the other category. There's so many actually that you cannot clearly identify as either reproducing these bodily stereotypes or not. And another limitation is also that obviously, and we are quite explicit about this, is that this is of course not an attempt to classify bodily beauty. That would be extremely difficult because this is so diverse on a global scale. What counts as beautiful, what is experienced as beautiful, and so on. But in our case, it happened that the student assistants that we hired were quite a homogeneous group. So these are all, participants or student assistants that identify as female, and they're all white and all in the same age group. I don't have the exact age in my mind at the moment. But and is this the subjective experience of this specific group, what they experience as beautiful, that's reflected by this algorithm? So that's a clear limitation, but it's an interesting attempt, right? So we're trying to teach an AI system to reproduce an aesthetic experience. And we want to use that model then to create a critical reflection of the reproduction of stereotypical norms of beauty on social media.
And basically, you want to generate or start off a debate about this topic then, based on the information and your findings.
Yeah. I wouldn't say start off. I mean, the debate is already there, right? It's a huge debate. Even, in psychology and so on, there is a lot of studies on the emotional, psychological impact of these bodily beauty norms. There's a big debate actually about especially young female users actually changing their bodies so they look more like the bodily beauty norms they see on social media, and so on and so on. So we are not saying we found this field or topic. We're just trying to make a specific anthropological contribution to it.
And is there any data that shows what this constant stream of beauty does to the self-perception?
So we are not studying it in a quantitative way, right? So this is not the kind of data we will have at the end that we can say, oh, this is the impact, this is how it changes basically on a normative level, how people perceive themselves. But what we can do in contrast is that we can provide or try to provide these thick descriptions, right? The kind of research we create, it's often articles and books that often read a bit like journalism. So we have these long quotes from interviews, we have these long descriptions of what people write about their own experiences and so on. And the idea is not to have this representative knowledge, it's really about letting readers of our research better understand how it is to actually live with these algorithms and live with these platforms, right? So it's a different kind of epistemic approach we're trying to do.
So what can you say so far about the way digital image feeds are designed?
Yeah, as I mentioned before, we don't know the exact details, although the companies behind TikTok and Instagram and so on, they have some transparency initiatives, but they don't tell you the full story, right? And it's quite complicated. If you look at the material they published, it's pages and pages of specifics that in the end don't tell you a lot. What we know is that both platforms collect what they call signals from users. These could be, something you like or an account you follow and so on. But it could also, especially on TikTok, be simply how long you look at a particular video. Right, and it already records the length, and then it uses it basically to create a profile of what you like, right? And what it does then is, at least TikTok, that is how its TikTok CEO once explained it, is to use AI-based pattern recognition process, which basically means, the way he explains it is, okay, we know that person A likes 1, 2, 3, and we know a person B that likes 1, 2, 3, and 4, so we figure 4 is also likable for person A. So what this AI-based system does is not simply to have, a collection of things with hashtags and it tries out to figure out what you like and then it gives these things to you. It actually creates a network of taste, a network of aesthetic preferences, right? And uses this network. So it basically incorporates the tastes of all people using the platform and builds aesthetic relationships and taste relationships between them to figure out what someone likes, and then uses this to provide someone else what this person potentially likes. So, it uses taste to work more effectively. And this is also why TikTok is gaining in popularity, especially because of this process and because their algorithm is so powerful with it, because users get suggested content that they maybe didn't even know they would like, but it actually works on a global scale, you know. And so this is quite interesting, but it also gives, of course, these AI-based algorithms an extreme power over what millions and millions of users see every day.
Makes me think of the filter bubble, of the concept of the filter bubble.
Yeah. I mean, the concept of the filter bubble has been questioned. It's not entirely accurate to say people live in filter bubbles. Especially TikTok, for example, it actually does these experiments with users. So you get a specific type of content and you can deep dive into that specific kind of content. And especially very emotional and polarizing content works very well, right? A lot of people see it, it goes viral, it's suggested to a lot of people, but it also, at least that's what the company claims, tries to diversify content in showing you things that are very unexpected for you, for example. So it's not only the filter bubble, it's kind of a mix of different strategies the algorithm applies in order to keep you, and that's always the principle, to keep you on social media as long as possible, so you can watch as many advertisements as possible.
And this strategy it works basically, doesn't it?
It works very well. So these companies are extremely valuable now. They're extremely influential also. And so it's a very good strategy. And I mean, there is a good reason why there is a lot of debate in Germany, also in the United States now, about limiting the influence of these algorithms and especially making them more transparent and have some safeguarding measures in place, especially when it comes to young people using it, where, other things come into play and can come into play, especially with teenagers.
Mm-hmm. So I'd really like to talk about the third topic of your research, or another focus of your research, which is highly interesting and relevant for all academics and students. This topic is generative artificial intelligence and the transformation of academic assemblages in the qualitative social sciences and humanities. Again, a long title, and it would be really nice if you could just sort of put it in a nutshell and give us an idea on what you're doing your research on.
When you read these titles out loud, I really figure I should do shorter subtitles in the future. All right. This project is about, I'll also start from the beginning. So last year, generative AI had its big moment. GPT 3.5 came out. A lot of people were and still are super hyped about the capacities of generative AI. And it also had a big impact and sparked a heated debate and also a lot of anxieties, I guess, at universities. And the interesting thing was that within a very short time frame, there were a lot of projects coming up that really, in a very good way, try to develop guidelines to talk about what are good educational strategies to implement it. There was a lot of political university academic political debates about what's the right way to use it, what should we allow, what shouldn't we allow, and so on. But the interesting thing was that there is really not a lot of research, especially qualitative and ethnographic research, on what actually happens on the ground. So what do students and researchers actually do with AI right now? How do they use it? And how does it change the way they create and work with knowledge? And this is what we call hybrid epistemic practices. So epistemic practices, basically knowledge practices that are hybrid in the sense that humans and AI systems come together to create and shape knowledge or learn about it, and so on. So this is why we started this project. It was funded by the University of Tübingen, funding from the Excellence Initiative. And we just started in spring, and we are doing qualitative interviews right now with a lot of researchers and students and trying to figure out, what are these practices? What happens in students and researchers' everyday lives at the moment when they implement GPT and similar systems. And so I don't have a lot of insights from the interview studies right now, but what we did start with is a survey, something we don't do so often, but sometimes. And actually over 500 people at the University of Tübingen participated. So we have a very good overview over what are actually these practices. And it's quite interesting because one of the most interesting findings is what they are not. But before I tell you, do you use GPT?
Yes, I do use it. Of course, I always check my generated text, but I use it as an inspiration. If it's for emails, for press releases, often I do use it, yes.
Do you also use it to generate texts in your work?
No, I often use it to summarize texts. If I have a rather long text, I'll have ChatGPT shorten it down and extract the the message of the text. But I wouldn't use it to generate a text from scratch. I'd use it for private reasons, but not for work. Yeah.
So that's pretty much also what others say in the survey. So the big fear at the university was, oh God, now all the students will write all their assignments with generative AI, researchers will just create articles with generative AI and so on. And our survey finding was that's actually the least frequent thing that both students in an anonymous survey, so we think it's true, and researchers say they do. I mean, some do it, generate parts of text and so on, but that's not the most frequent thing. But other really interesting practices come up. And you just mentioned a couple. Actually, I have brought a couple of quotes from the survey here. So there was qualitative parts. People could say, what are you using AI for? And they reflect on it. I'm reading a couple, so we have a bit of a different format. Okay, so here's one from a master's student of peace research and international relations, which is quite an interesting study program at the University of Tübingen. So the person says, instead of asking Google and having to browse websites for answers, generative AI can provide me with a basic overview answer that might be sufficient enough of an answer. And then a bit later, that's interesting for me, I may be in class and the AI may be more useful than the professor in explaining a certain key term or concept. So this is also, there's some reason for anxiety for professors here, but mostly what you see here is that these are examples where people use AI, as you yourself did or do, for exploring knowledge, for finding new ideas, and also for working with resources, for working with academic literature, in this case, explaining a concept better to better understand it, and so on. Another one that you actually also mentioned, at least a little bit, so here's the quote from a bachelor student in education and social work. I actually use AI more like Google or a mirror. I enter a few words or thoughts for a possible term paper and ask for possible research questions or for an outline as well as theories or literature. It never happened so far that I take over an outline or a research question exactly. For me, ChatGPT is more a source of inspiration and a help for reflection. So this is something that a lot of people mention, that they use it kind of for brainstorming. Some people also write about it helps them overcome writer's block and, get into the flow of writing and things and so on. And it's also interesting, of course, there were critical reflections of how AI shapes our everyday life at the university. Just two examples, maybe. The first one is a quote from a postdoc researcher in archaeology, so a more experienced researcher. I have already experienced that ChatGPT has given me false information or made false sources or literature suggestions that do not exist. This can be a problem if you don't check it properly and trust the AI. Now comes the interesting part. The AI also tempts you. So in German, he used the word verführt, tempts you to use it more often, although it should rather be used as an aid because it cannot replace a proper scientific paper. So what the person is talking about comes up quite often. It's this problem of a potentially uncritical adaptation of AI-generated output, right? And this question of temptation, right? It's so easy to use. And it's actually not good. And most students see the results are not so great if you use it to generate text. But it has this temptation, especially when the pressure is on and you have to deliver. And so that people are tempted to use it anyway. And this temptation is now there. It's in the room, right? And so people struggle with that. And there comes the last point, is also a point of critical reflection. One person, also postdoc researcher in this case of sports science, writes, learning to think for yourself, will that still be needed at all? And if everyone else uses it, so GPT, I have to use it too. At least if professorships are still awarded based on the quantity of research performance. So this directly kind of follows from the other quote that this temptation is there, and the idea is there that others might use it, and so they have an advantage. So I have to use it too, although I think it's probably not the best thing, but I have to work faster, I have to produce more output, and so on. So we see here that these hybrid epistemic practices have an impact on our academic life that goes beyond, I'm just using GPT. It's actually changing the social and also competitive dynamics at the university. And these are transformations, seemingly small, but I think they're quite important, that come along with a system like GPT. And we just started, as I said, but we want to explore these, and we will also feed them back into the university. I'm also part of a working group that is responsible for developing basically the politics of the university and ideas and guidelines for teaching and research and so on. And we are feeding these insights also back into this working group, and not only, but also, of course, into the research area on AI and science.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a bit about the pros and cons of the usage of AI in the context of universities, and how it changes the orders of universities and how it changes the work that students do. Like, what would the pros be?
Well, some I just mentioned. So it gives options for additional exploration of literature sources, of potential ideas, of information, and so on. If it's used responsibly and with a critical reflection of the limitations of generative AI, it can be an asset. One thing, actually the most frequent practice that came up in our survey is basically language editing and translation. And several researchers mentioned that this actually is very positive because it kind of levels the playing field. Not everyone could compete on English academic market, international market, with not being a native speaker. And it's very expensive, to pay for people to do style editing, proofreading, translation, and so on. And that has become much, much easier. Also, the other way around, you can argue that literature, especially from countries that are not, working mostly in academia on English or German and so on, that these languages and the literature in these languages can be better recognized now. So it kind of helps to overcome these language barriers in academic research, for example. So these are definitely some of the pros, right? Also, I should mention, for example, it can help, again, with critical reflection, potentially in creating access to different kinds of knowledge that haven't been there before. For example, people from families that have not an academic background, can use these systems, again, for proofreading, something that for, kids from that have academic parents, their parents do that for them. And now people have at least a chance to use a system to that helps them in doing so. And actually, people from the Writing Competence Center here at the Brechtbau said this is really interesting opportunities for teaching people about language and writing and so on. But then, of course, there's a long list of potential problems. So, how much time do you have? The big thing, of course, is the first thing is that generative AI always implies potentially stereotypes and also discriminative stereotypes that are embedded already in the data that has been used to train these models, and also reproduces these stereotypes. And this is not only about hardcore racism and so on, it's also about other things. For example, if you ask an academic question to GPT, it might have a perfectly good answer about a very well-known research concept or so in the international English-speaking literature. But a more marginalized concept that comes, from the global south or so, which might be super helpful for you, but is not just as well known, will probably not be mentioned at all. So this is also kind of marginalization of already marginalized bodies of knowledge that can be intensified through the use of AI if you don't think about these shortcomings of these systems.
So on the one hand, you're saying we have marginalization, and on the other side, we have a more democratic...
Yeah, it's more, there's, to a certain extent, it can contribute to equality and diversity of and equal chances in education and so on. But it also can do the exact opposite, right? It can create binaries. It can create exclusions. It can, and it also, that's another downside, gives, of course, those who control these systems enormous power, right? And we can be lucky to a certain extent. OpenAI, this is we can talk a lot about this company and what it does, but to a certain extent, I guess we can be happy that it is an institution that to a certain extent follows democratic values, right, and represents them, because this could be different. And those who control generative AI systems that are in use can control, maybe even without us knowing it, the way we think if we rely on these, and the way we do research if we rely on these systems without reflecting on it. So, yeah. And then there's the whole ecological footprint thing. Is something not a lot of people think about, that AI, it's often, AI, it sounds like this cloud thing. It's ephemeral. You cannot see it or grasp it. But actually, there's very, very huge server parks that take a lot of energy and consume a lot of water and also rare minerals for building the GPUs that are used and so on. And especially on the scale that generative AI is applied now. So every Google search has now generative AI answers in it, right? And on this scale, this is really a huge consumption of natural resources. And, in the midst of the climate crisis, we really have to think about it. Is it worth it? Does it really provide us with any advantages? And so on. And so these are all downsides that students and researchers should be aware of, I think.
Mm-hmm. One last downside, maybe, which we can talk about, is a loss of certain competencies. What do you think are these competencies that are getting lost on the way with using more and more AI?
Yeah, it's called, in the debate on AI in education, it's called de-skilling. That's the word that's most often used to describe the phenomenon. So you use AI for a certain task, and then you yourself get worse in doing this task. And of course, that's certainly a potential problem. But it depends, right? So this is not particularly new, I would say. I mean, we haven't really forget about how to walk because we have bikes and cars, right? And we still can, to a certain extent, calculate, although we have a calculator. Probably not as well anymore, I don't know. So there are a lot of technologies that help us with doing something, and they didn't replace completely the other thing. And but of course, de-skilling is also real in that if you use an AI for translating your texts, then if you did speak the language or do speak the language, you will probably over time get worse and worse in it because you don't practice, right? So that's makes a lot of sense. But then again, this is how the world works, I guess. We create technologies, and to a certain extent, they help us and free us up to do other things with that time. But the question is then one of trust and control. So the actual problem with de-skilling, I think, is not that we lose the skills, but if we lose the skills and we cannot trust the system to do the task at hand in the right way, right? So to know if your AI has translated correctly, you need to be able to speak that language properly. And when it comes to science and scientific outcomes, this is actually something that is right now in the debate really, really important. Actually, just the last couple of weeks, I tried out different AI systems with my students, and we talked about, does it make sense? Doesn't it make sense? And they are super critical about it. And I'm glad about that, because they say, well, in order to see if this result makes sense at all, I already need to have the knowledge to be able to evaluate if it makes sense. So I still have to learn everything. So this is the good news, I guess, that I don't think that in the near future AI will replace the need, to study at university or school and so on, because AI might be able to help us with some things, but humans need to have the necessary knowledge to critically reflect upon the results and see if they're actually good or not. And often they aren't.
But what you're saying is we definitely become more dependent on AI if we use it on a regular basis and we are de-skilling at the same time, or?
Not necessarily. If we are aware that this is a potential problem and we avoid our own de-skilling and we kind of remain in charge by always staying attentive and critical to AI-based output, then we do not necessarily de-skill, right? Then it can be an extension of our skills. Then it can actually save time, especially when it comes to repetitive tasks. It can, enhance what we do. and not replace it.
Okay, from future scenarios of AI at universities and especially the University of Tübingen, we want to get back to the more tangible world and talk about the location of Tübingen. What is it you like especially about the city and the location for your research?
Well, I actually like very much that it's such a small town with so much going on. So on the one hand, it's quite cozy. I mean, it depends on the person. It's your personal taste if you like that. I like it. It's a cozy town with a lot of green and so on. And at the same time, there's really a lot going on. I mean, it's at the moment, especially around AI and computer science and so on, but also in the humanities more generally. And what I really enjoy is the short distances in Tübingen. I mean, geographically, but to be honest, also socially. If you work in a big city and a university in a big city, it's often in my experience, I worked in a big city, it's more difficult to connect because I guess this small space kind of transcends this feeling of we are in this together, I guess. So it's a small town. You meet people like walking down the street and so on. And people are there. They just show up for meetings and, for discussions and so on. And this creates a really nice atmosphere, I think, and it's really productive. And this combination of a very modern research environment with this this coziness of Tübingen is actually very productive, I must say. So, and I enjoy it.
Okay, so what would you say is so special about the Ludwig-Uhland-Institute of Historical and Cultural Anthropology?
Yeah, well, our institute is special in several ways. It has a very specific history that I will not go into detail, but it has a very difficult history that's connected to National Socialism. But it was also, since the 1960s, a very extremely progressive institute that built up or participated in the building up of cultural anthropology in Germany and played quite a significant role. So it has a very interesting and complex history, and it's a small department now with 3 professorships, but a really good one, I think, and we have different areas of expertise. And what makes this institute special is that we don't do this principle of having different professorships that all do their own thing, but we all share a lot of responsibilities, but also research interests. And we have several projects where we collaborate, where we closely work together. And this is the same for teaching, that we really try and work together to create interesting teaching programs for our students. And so this is, in my experience, maybe not unique, but it's an institute that works very well in terms of both research and teaching and has a very productive outcome. And then also the place, of course. We are on the castle in Tübingen, so everyone is welcome to visit us someday. If you go into the castle and you walk up the stairs, then you see like a little house, and it really looks like out of a Grimm's fairy tale, But if you go in, it's actually not a house, it's a tower, and it goes down into the castle with our own library and interesting furniture, which has to do with its history. But come and see for yourself.
Okay, sounds fascinating in any case. So how would you spend your weekend if you're not delving into the depths of algorithms and artificial intelligence and Instagram feeds?
I spend pretty much all my weekends with my 4-year-old son. And so I do what 4-year-old kids do. A lot of running around through the park and, going swimming and eating ice cream quite a lot this summer and, playing games.
Sounds like a great life. Okay, so last but not least question, what is the key to your research?
I think that with the, current hype around artificial intelligence, we are really at an interesting point in history. And there is a lot of hype around AI technologies, and I'm also skeptical about the hype, but I do think it is one of these technologies that will change in the long run a lot how we live together. And I guess what I'm trying to do, what we are trying to do, my teams and I, is to contribute a specific kind of knowledge that really tries to grasp how it shapes the everyday lives of people. and contribute to through this kind of knowledge to contribute to a better understanding of what happens, and then hopefully make these small contributions to a societal debate and also political decisions and so on that can better acknowledge the complexity of what happens, and contribute in a nutshell to a future in which we make better decisions about how to live together with artificial intelligence.
Thank you, Christoph, for sharing and giving us a glimpse into this fascinating field of research.
Thank you for having me.
This was Key to My Research, a podcast produced by Changing Time in cooperation with the University of Tübingen. You can find information and the links to the sources in the show notes below. To get to know more fascinating scientists and their research, please subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and recommend it to your friends and colleagues. Thanks for listening. My name is Jennifer, and see you next time.